They've stood at the front lines of law, leadership, and public service. From the courtroom to the classroom, Attorney Karen Jimeno brings sharp legal insight, academic excellence, and a voice that has guided national conversations. Attorney Mike Toledo, a seasoned public affairs strategist and legal mind with years in media, corporate leadership, and government reform. Together, they bring law to life with experience, integrity, and the courage to ask hard questions. Two minds shaped by the law. Two voices trusted in and out of the courtroom. This is ABOGADO.
Good evening and welcome to ABOGADO, the program where we bring clarity to the law and shed light on the issues that shape our nation. I'm Attorney Mike Toledo.
And I'm Attorney Karen Jimeno. Tonight, we take on a compelling and controversial debate at the crossroads of rights, governance, and accountability. Let's take a closer look at our proposition.
Years ago, the Supreme Court drew the line. Random drug testing was ruled constitutional for students and employees. But mandatory drug testing for candidates for public office and for those merely accused of crimes was declared unconstitutional. Now, a new debate emerges. What about government employees and appointed officials already in office? Some say drug testing should be required across the board, that public service demands clean records, accountability, and trust. Others warn, not every mandate is constitutional, and not every suspicion should override basic rights. Is this a step toward cleaner governance or a threat to civil liberties? Should all government employees and appointed officials be required to undergo mandatory drug testing?
Arguing for the proposition is Attorney Krystyna Nicole Feliciano, Senior Legal Advisor at Cabrera Company. She has advice on legal and compliance frameworks for government procurement and regulatory oversight, particularly in the transportation and public service sectors. Her work has spanned industries such as defense, aviation, and infrastructure, areas where accountability and public trust are critical. She earned her philosophy degree from the University of Santo Tomas and her Juris Doctor from San Beda College, Alabang.
Now, taking the negative position is Attorney Samantha Tan, who has taught political law, constitutional law, and criminal law at institutions including the Mindanao State University, Iligan, Institute of Technology College of Law, and FINMA Republican College of Criminology. She has earned her Juris Doctor from the FEU Institute of Law and pursued further studies at the Asian Institute of Management. As a legal counsel and LGBT advocate, she combines her expertise in constitutional rights and criminal justice with a strong commitment to protecting individual freedoms against overreach of state power.
Before we start, here is how tonight's discussion will proceed.
We begin with the opening statements. First, the speaker supporting the proposition presents their position in a focused 2-minute statement. Then, the speaker challenging the proposition offers their perspective, also within 2 minutes. The conversation then unfolds through 2 key subtopics. For each subtopic, the guest supporting the proposition presents their insights for 2 minutes, followed by a 2-minute perspective from the guest challenging the proposition. After both perspectives have been presented, we move into the open exchange. A 6-minute free-flowing discussion where both guests ask questions, share points, and respond to each other directly. Once both subtopics have been explored, we proceed to closing reflections where each guest is given 2 minutes to summarize their key messages. And finally, the hosts step in with their own questions. In this 6-minute segment, the guests respond, clarify, and deepen the discussion, ensuring no critical point is left unexplored.
Now, with that out of the way, we begin with opening statements. The question, Should all government employees and appointed officials be required to undergo mandatory drug testing? Attorney Nicole, you have 2 minutes.
At present, there is a rising clamor for drug testing for elected and appointed public officials to ensure the highest standards of competency and integrity among our public servants. It is a reasonable sentiment for the Filipino people to demand that elected officials and even appointed officials, whose authority ultimately emanates from the vox populi or the voice of the people, be held demonstrable of standard of fitness. In my opinion, I am squarely an advocate of mandatory drug testing, but the same must be done without prejudicing the tenets of the rights of privacy and the guarantee against self-incrimination. The Comprehensive Dangerous Drugs Act, People versus Soliano, De La Cruz versus People, and the Social Justice Society versus Dangerous Drugs Board already allows random drug testing for officers and employees for both public and private offices. These cannot be imposed as a qualification, however, for candidates for elective position. However, random testing for employees is a constitutional and a valid exercise of police power. Nevertheless, while there is no requirement that elected and appointed officials be subject to mandatory drug testing under the law, there is equally no restriction of random drug test that should be implemented at governmental bodies so desire. The Supreme Court itself at OCA Circular 246/2024 has included a random drug testing in the annual physical examination of the judges and its court personnel.
Thank you so much, Attorney Nicole. And now we go to you, Attorney Samantha, your opening statement.
Good evening, everyone. I disagree with the random drug testing. Number one, public office is public trust, yes, but there is a presumption of regularity in all public officers. Hence, it is presumed that all of them are fit to work and render government service at its utmost capacity. Always remember that before they get accepted, they go through rigorous examinations, interviews, and we are always based under the constitutional law of merit and fitness tests. The fact that they're already in office, they are fit, and they have the merit to be in that office. If the purpose of curtailing drug abuse, it is just a question of supply and demand. The economics of it, if you do not make drugs available, there will be no buyers. They cannot buy drugs anywhere. We must come up with a policy instead of drug testing. We must come up with a policy that will limit or stop the availability of prohibited drugs.
Okay, very good, Attorney Samantha. Short and sweet. You have a lot of time left out of that 2 minutes.
It's not too often that we have guests that can really come up with their arguments in that period of time, shorter than what's allotted to them.
And well, of course,
Concise.
I think this became highly relevant because there were calls for some people in Senate to have mandatory drug testing because of an incident there where there was weed that was smelled supposedly from one of the offices or in Senate.
Yes.
But it is interesting to now discuss the details of whether this should be allowed or whether this would be an unconstitutional. So let's start with the first subtopic, constitutional validity and scope of government power. Does mandatory drug testing of public officials and employees pass the constitutional test? Attorney Nicole, you have 2 minutes to share your perspective.
Mandatory random drug test of government employees and valid officials qualifies as a valid exercise of the state's police power. Actually, in the case of Venus Commercial versus DOH FDA, it explained that it passes a lawful subject and lawful method. The subject here actually is the general welfare in keeping the bureaucracy drug-free and accountable. This method should be random and confidential, conducted by the accredited facilities of DOH under confirmatory procedures to ensure that these requisites are met. This policy also finds strong grounding in Article 11 of the Constitution, wherein all public officials should serve with integrity, responsibility, and efficiency. In OCA versus Salazar Jr., It shows that the court has not hesitated to sanction employees who tested positive in random drug testing, stressing that any act of impropriety, whether it's highest or even the lowest public servant, erodes in confidence to government institutions. While drug testing entails an intrusion to privacy, and I also agree about the presumption of regularity, those already in the name and also those in the public positions already accept from the start that their conduct is subject to oversight. It bears noting that even in the conduct of ethical standards for public officials must always uphold public interest over their own personal interest.
Thank you so much, Attorney Nicole. And now, Attorney Samantha, your view.
I would like to submit a disapproval to that motion because number one, we have to consider, if you consider lawful subject, there must be a pressing need for us to regulate. An incident, one incident versus for so many years of existence in the Senate cannot be a lawful subject. For a lawful subject, you must also have a lawful objective. What is the objective really? Are we really here for the drug abusers or are we here for the not selling of drugs? What would be the evil sought to be avoided in the regulation for the mandatory drug testing? You get the users, not the pushers. We go for the pushers, not the users. The users need treatment. Criminal justice, law enforcement must focus on pushers and sellers.
Okay.
And that is a better lawful subject and lawful objective.
Okay. Well, now let's open the floor for a 6-minute exchange. Attorneys, you may respond, rebut, or clarify. So who wants to go first with a question with regards to any points raised during your statements?
Attorney Sam, what do you think is the test for competency when it comes to public officials?
Intellectual, emotional, and physical fitness.
Do you agree
Integrity would also be one.
Do you agree with me that even mental fitness is one of the things that you have to consider when it comes to delivery of not just being a government official, but also being a government employee?
Mental fitness is definitely part of the requirements that we must have for public officials. But mental fitness, the fact that you will be able to pass the rigorous test, pen and paper, and interview, that is already enough for us to be able to determine whether a person is mentally fit and physically fit. If we are going to check morality in relation to drug abuse or drug use, that's another story.
Yeah. So I guess that's my question also. With that line of questioning, are you asking the competency and other types of metrics to determine whether a government employee is fit to work in their certain position? And are you relating that with testing positive for drugs?
To be honest, I just believe, and I actually subscribe to the fact that it is a continuing duty of every public official or government employee to always, be the leader and have to be the ones of the front runners for the drug-free act of bureaucracy. Of course, we have to make sure that in order for us to be very, very good examples, you have to lead them by example as well. To be completely honest, I felt like a lot of the initiatives of the government, let's say when it comes to surveillance and all of these things, also matter when it comes to mandatory drug testing. When you are being randomly asked to take this drug test, even if you tested positive, it's not because you wanted to be deterred or given maybe an be labeled, but in fact you just wanted to make sure that this is a good example to set. Since even our government employees in the CSC are already undergoing these. What should be the difference or even the metric when it comes to government officials? Why shouldn't they not take it?
Yeah. Well, here's my question, because when you mention leading by example, there have been calls for the President of the Philippines to take a hair follicle test. So what is your take on that? Is that something that would strengthen accountability and have more credibility when it comes to having a drug-free government?
free speech, okay?
Yeah.
I hope I will be within the bounds of protective speech. The call for him to have a drug testing, the hair follicle tests, coming from a public opinion, a very strong and loud public opinion, is because of some physical manifestations that made him suspect of drug abuse. But the presumption of innocence is guaranteed by the Constitution under the rights of the accused must always prevail. In the same way that the Dangerous Drugs Board just came out with a study for 2023 that there is already a decline of drug use.
There's a decline for the country.
Yes. That's 2023. I don't know about 2024. I was trying to Google the 2024 study and 2025. There was none. So if the trend is going down, what is the point of getting to know who are the users? Why don't we get to know who are the suppliers? That there would be no users.
You have a good point there, Attorney Samantha. And in relation to what Attorney Karen, my partner, said, no? And I guess I can also, just a follow-up and to address to both of you as well. If you look at the Constitution, kasi we're talking about elected public officials being subjected to a mandatory drug test. Pero pag ating tinignan ng saligang batas, wala namang nagsasabi doon na ang tatakbo dapat magkaroon ng drug testing. Hindi ako nagkakamali. Ang nakalagay lang doon, if you're a senator, at least 35 years of age. If you're running for president, 40 years. And then there are some other...
able to read and write.
rights.
Natural
of course,
born citizen.
A citizen, no? In fact, some people are even arguing, parang mas mahirap pa maging security guard. Di ba? Kasi ang security guard, kailangan mo pa ng drug test, kailangan mo pa ng diploma, etc., etc., etc. So my point is the mandatory suggestion to have mandatory testing for public elected officials, clearly it adds another requirement not provided for by the Constitution. This is for both of you.
And not to mention, Attorney Toledo, the essence of republicanism is representation, the popular voice. People will vote for their representative. If you add more qualifications, you will be defeating the purpose of republicanism. Remember, aside from a democracy, we are not a direct democracy. We are a democracy by representation. So it is the voice of the people from the choices given to the electorate. We must be able to choose the best one.
Yeah, but aren't there also additional requirements under the Omnibus Election Code? I mean, when it comes to disqualification, there are grounds. So I would consider that as a type of requirement, because then if you have grounds for disqualification, you're unable to run, or if you get elected, then that can be nullified.
For example, if you are, let's say, found guilty or convicted of a crime, and then there's perpetual disqualification for running for public office.
But in our country, drug use is crime.
But again, presumption of innocence.
Until
you
proven
are
guilty.
innocent until proven guilty beyond reasonable doubt.
So, Attorney Nicole, would you say that requiring drug testing violates that right of against self-incrimination?
No, it will not violate the right to self-incrimination.
No, it does not. It's not the right against self-incrimination that we are arguing here, but the presumption of innocence. Incrimination only entails testimonial compulsion and the use
Not
of...
providing, based on our
Not providing
jurisprudence, not
physical
providing
evidence.
physical evidence. It doesn't fall under incrimination.
That's not, absolutely. I agree with her. Totally.
I set that question up para meron kayong agreement on something.
And to be honest, even if we have the Constitution, a lot of these qualifications already written, I mean, I think you would agree with me, Attorney Karen, Attorney Mike, that we have actually other accountability mechanisms. Let's see, even the SAL-N. You know, these things are being required for public office, not just because of, we wanted to make sure that the bureaucracy stands, but just to make sure that public service will always be for the people. So these things we have to do. There's always another layer from another layer that we have to take measure, because of course the Constitution will always be there as a supreme source of law of the land. But because of everything that's been happening around, we also have to take measures of our own hands and make sure that these officers are accountable if needed be.
From the assumption, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but please, go ahead.
The assumption here is that elected officials and public officials are drug users from that statement. But the assumption here is we have to always assume all of the public officers, elected, appointed, or through merit and fitness are presumed to be innocent. That is supposed to be the basic assumption. So my question is, what data do we have for us to require mandatory drug testing? Is there really a pressing call for such? And what is the purpose of that?
Or ang sinasabi mo siguro, will the admission or non-admission of somebody, of a staff member of the Senate who allegedly smoked an illegal drug, which is marijuana, well, but it's not illegal in other places in the world, no? Only in the Philippines. Is that enough to actually revive the call for mandatory testing? I think that's also his underlying question.
And also to ask the question, like, do we really have to spend so much money in capturing the users instead of the sellers? Who are we really after here?
Well, that's one of the arguments, partner, actually, no? And if I may, before I ask Attorney Nicole to answer what Attorney Samantha said, alam mo, maraming detalya, mga facts, empirical evidence na nagsasabi, to conduct a mandatory drug test would require billions. Malaking pera. So sinasabi nila, why do we not just use that for something more pressing? For example, focus on the rehabilitation. Focus on the improvement of the workplaces, for example,
or the
drug education.
Improvement of enforcement
Exactly.
as well?
Yun ang
para
sinasabi
yung
nila.
supply nga, you can cut off the supply.
Kasi a mandatory testing would require, if the DILG, for example, were to conduct a mandatory testing immediately, it would cost roughly 2-point-something billion pesos. So,
malaking pera din pala.
Malaking pera. So, in your view, Attorney Nicole, how do you now answer such allegations of, let's say, practicality?
And I think when you answer that question, put it under the next subtopic because meron tayong next subtopic on governance, ethics, and policy implementation.
Yes.
Yeah.
In fact, we're now in that topic, which is would the policy strengthen accountability or risk abuse? No, so Attorney Nicole, to follow up to my earlier question and ituhog natin dito sa ating subtopic ngayon, ano ang iyong pananaw?
On the financial costs.
And everything else,
Yeah,
and the policy
you have
considerations.
2 minutes, yeah.
So for me, the value of drug testing in government service lies in how, it reinforces ethical standards and cultivates accountability. Public servants are expected to have integrity, efficiency, and responsibility. And the knowledge of testing, that knowledge of testing occurs and helps sustain a culture of discipline, to be completely honest. Much like the requirement of SAL-N, it is not meant to punish, but actually to remind our officials that accountability is a continuing obligation, which also serves as, also presumption of regularity and on their end. So the practical benefits of this policy extends beyond deterrence. So it builds public trust by assuring that the citizens in this office remains fit to serve, and it contributes to political stability by bolstering the credibility of these government institutions. Of course, there will be financial costs. We cannot deny this. But of course, when we engage accredited laboratories and even medical providers, these things will always outweigh our gains. And feasibility is already proven by long practice, The judiciary in 2024 has already incorporated the random drug testing into all annual physical exams. In the Senate, also revived the MRDT program. So I guess accountability must be uniform across bureaucracies. If the Supreme Court was able to do this, why are we not doing this in the Senate? Why are we not doing this even in the executive branch when they have proven well-orientedly that they can actually do it? So all those who took the oath should accept the same standards, whether career employee or high-level appointees. Just to carve out any distinctions would suggest that some officials are actually less bound by this constitutional duty, which undermines, of course, the purpose of this public policy. So in order to make the system fair, just the testing should just be random and not targeting. Confidential just to preserve the dignity of all these results. And medically verified by the DOH accredited services and laboratories. This policy, again, for me, Attorney Sam, Attorney Karen, Attorney Mike, is just for the preventive measure. It's not to punish, because at the end of the day, they are actually excluded from, the CSC resolution.
Yeah.
And with that being said, this cannot be used as a political weapon at any point.
Okay, and just in time to finish because you are out of time. And Attorney Samantha, your turn. You have 2 minutes.
We always have to remember that there are 5 pillars of criminal justice: law enforcement, prosecution, judiciary, institutional corrections and society. 5 pillars must work over this drug problem that we have in the Philippines. It is not only about law enforcement or detection, it is also society helping each other build a community that is healthy, mental, physical, and spiritual-wise. Let us always remember that man is a rational being. As a natural human being, it is but natural, moral for a person to seek what is the truth for perfection. In that philosophical stance and point, it is not drug testing that will solve the drug problem of the country. Stop the supply, drug use will stop eventually.
Oh, thank you very much, Attorney Sam. I guess, Attorney Samantha, that's really a very strong statement again about
Yes,
stopping the supply of drugs. Ang sinasabi ka nila, may nagsasabi din partner, let's test the drugs daw. Let's not test the people. Kasi marami daw mga drugs ngayon for example, there are certain drugs and supplements that allegedly are actually detrimental to the health of Filipino people. For example, mga beauty products, yung mga supplements. Some people are arguing na, yan yung tingnan natin. The FDA must take a look into that, aside from prohibited drugs, but drugs that actually cause so much harm. But anyway, we now again open the floor for another
6-minute
robust...
exchange, which already started.
6-minute discussion. Yeah. Would either counsel like to open the exchange, or would you like to comment on what I just said and start off from there?
I'd like to pick up from the point of Attorney Nicole, because before she raised that, yung sa SALN, that's something that already crossed my mind. Because by analogy, if we're talking about Attorney Samantha, yung presumption of regularity and presumption of innocence, I believe that that's kind of a nice analogy where we are presuming that our government officials are not corrupt, but instead of just not doing anything, we do require them to file a SALN so that we can check kung merong bang mga unusual wealth that was generated while being in office that's disproportionate to their income. So, di ba parang pareho rin yun na you're asking them to comply with something even if you're presuming that they're innocent?
Attorney Karen, SALN came from the issue of corruption. Ang major premise niyan is, kung mayaman ang kandidato, if the public servant is already rich, he will not steal from the kaban ng bayan. That's why you have the SALN. That's the rationale of the SALN. But proven and tested of late, regardless whether the public servant is rich or poor, makati talaga kamay.
So, paano mga huhulihin? Diba?
Greed is good,
Isn't SALN one of those tools that allow us to enforce accountability?
SALN is different because it has no stigma as against being identified as a drug user.
But isn't
And
the
it would
stigma also because we have laws that prohibit drug use?
Yes. I mean, at the end of the day, the Philippines is a drug-free country. I understand that we always have to solve the problem into the root cause. But while the problem is not yet at large, why don't we do this and then make our leaders a little bit more accountable? Even if the private employees, even the other public officials are already doing the mandatory drug testing. Even the judiciary, even without this requirement, they're already doing this, because I believe that they have recognized that solving this in a smaller scale will eventually eliminate the problem early on.
But let me answer that using developmental tools. In the development world, you have to identify the gap. Where is the gap? What is the problem? What is the source of the problem? Why? The 5 whys question. Why are we so against drugs? And why is there an issue about drugs? Again, is it really the users or the suppliers? So, if it is the users that we're after, then go ahead with the mandatory drug testing. And then after that, what? We will come up with more if we will not stop the supply. So it's just like cutting the branches, but you're not going to the root of the problem. Why not go to the root of the problem, snip it from the bud, kill the supply, use will end.
What about doing a parallel approach?
Yes, a parallel approach.
What
I believe we're already doing the
Meaning
parallel
may testing
approach.
and then also trying to stop the
So
supply.
is the approach of catching the users an end that will justify the means of going against the presumption of innocence?
Yes, it is an accountability mechanism. I mean, the main reason why there's an accountability mechanism is to always just remind these public officials. We're talking about public officials here, not just regular employees.
You're talking about accountability, so you're already talking about punishment.
Well, no, it's more of a preventive measure too.
Kasi no one gets punished naman kung if you test clean, right?
Yeah.
Like we do that
Yeah,
for
but if you test-
driver's licenses.
But what if, isa pa yung driver's license na yan.
Palagay mo dapat wala.
Matagal nang nagte-drug test noon.
Oo, so palagay mo dapat
wala rin
wala.
namang nahuling drug user. Marami pa rin mga bus drivers who
So
are
you think
into...
there are ways to get around, to game the system pag merong testing?
So it's not really the drug testing that's the problem.
But I think
or
it's
the
a good
solution.
start. It's always a good start. We have to start. The government
We
has
started.
to.
We started, but it has not cured.
Yeah, but di ba, I think ang pinag-uusapan naman natin dito is, I think both of us agree that there should be some sort of testing. Am I right?
Yes.
I think both of you agree. There should be some sort of testing. But the only difference is that whether or not
Ayaw
it
niya.
should be mandatory or should it be random.
Hindi, ganito.
Yun, di ba?
Hindi.
Is that a
Tingnan natin,
clarification?
Kasi parang ang
Kasi
sense
di ba
ko from
parang-
attorney Samantha, walang testing dapat.
Hindi. Yung iba kasi,
No.
Yun ang gusto niyo sa akin.
ang pinag-uusapan kasi dito, di ba?
Paninindigan ko.
Na kailangan magkaroon ng testing one way or the other. Pero ang tanong, should it be mandatory or should it be random? The Supreme Court has spoken, pwede random, hindi pwede mandatory. So ang
Hindi
tanong
ba
ko sa inyong
mandatory
dalawa,
yun?
Mandatory
Pag
random also.
Mandatory random.
Kasi
ba't random lang? Ito mandatory, lahat.
Lahat.
Yung
Lahat.
sa ano,
Ang random kasi,
Parang
kunyari,
you pick
pagpasok ko
people.
lang, ikaw, halika dito. Ikaw, halika dito.
Russian
Ang mandatory, lahat kayo, tetestingin.
But
That's the
isn't that
difference.
also, let's say, if you're saying that random drug testing is allowed, pareho na rin yun na allowing everyone
you cannot
else.
say no eh.
Yeah, because otherwise,
Kaya nga, that's my question. Di ba? Kasi ang Supreme Court, klaro eh. Pinayagan nila ang random. Pero ayaw nila ng mandatory. And then, eto pa, ang pinag-uusapan ngayon is more on the elected political officials.
yeah, can you
mandatory.
Guys, can you guys clarify with me, has there been a decision of the Supreme Court that has stricken down any mandatory drug testing as unconstitutional?
It's in SJS and Osmeña, decided 2023, and SJS Society.
But these are
saying
in
that it's unconstitutional.
Unconstitutional for elective positions.
Also in the...
as an added qualification attorney for candidates.
And
But
also the Salomon case, di ba?
Yes.
The
Or the
Salomon.
Salomon case with the municipality of the city of,
Yes.
I think the city of Mandaluyong.
So ayun
It was
ba,
clear.
does that
Oh, that's
involve
clear.
elected officials or
Elected.
government employees?
It was an elected official.
Elected.
Pero pag government employees, wala
Payag
pa.
sila, wala.
Wala pang nagsasabi unconstitutional.
wala pa.
Wala. Pero ang sa akin, do the drug testing when you are already charged. When you are
Paano mo naman
But
malalaman?
but you cannot because
Yeah.
parang nag-fishing expedition ka naman na
Hindi.
and that's gonna be trampling
You-
on your right against self-incrimination because
You-
you're already charged with criminal cases.
You will not be charged without prima facie evidence or probable certainty na kanya, di ba? Certainty
Of course.
conviction.
Reasonable
Oh.
certainty of
Pag
conviction.
Which is higher.
Oh.
Pinag-usapan namin yun last time.
Di ba? Reasonable certainty of conviction. That means that when there is already a reasonable certainty of conviction for you, that you are into... Kasi nga hindi ko maintindihan, why do you have to go through drug test if our objective here is to eradicate
Drug
the
use.
availability of drugs?
But is
Just
that the objective?
that's
Kasi
the
from the
yeah.
point of Attorney Nicole, I think your objective is also to lead by example,
Yes.
right? As a government entity.
Because at the end of the day, at the end of the day, Attorney Sam naman, I mean, it's really just to deter, it's to prevent, not to really punish them. At the end of the day, it's yung CSC came up with their exclusion. You know, once at first instance someone tests positive, that's just mandatory rehabilitation. If again you test another and you don't want to undergo rehabilitation, then you're gonna be, I think, administrative offense. I think grave misconduct. But that's already, I mean, at most that's already what's in place here. They're not asking you to leave your posts or for your removal in office, but they're just making you remember that you're there because you have to serve competently with the right mindset, lead by example, help eradicate drugs. And our leaders, I believe, have this much responsibility in their hands.
But this again, we are against fishing expedition, di ba? So what is fishing expedition? You throw a bait, hope that you will be able to catch a fish. Di ba? So, fishing expedition din ng random
It's
mandatory
like
drug
saying
testing.
that yung pag-file ng SAL and fishing expedition.
Hindi, kasi yung SALN, you will really declare what you already have to make sure that when you leave public office, hindi ka mas yumaman. Di ba?
Yeah.
You do not end up richer than before. Here, the government wants you to retire healthier than
See,
before?
diba, napaka-lively discussion. Talagang naubos na yung time natin for the 6
alam mo,
minutes.
partner,
but-
before we go to a
Yeah.
quick break, I guess kailangan malaman din ng ating mga kababayan at mga nanonood, no, that for a government official, if he's caught taking drugs, it's not even a criminal case.
Yes, it's
It's
not.
an administrative case.
Which
that
I
has to be
agree.
very clear to everyone.
Yes.
Administrative case lang po. And ang ating Civil Service Commission came up with resolutions precisely treating
To
it as such,
exclude them.
which is actually in line with our international commitment in the UN and international organizations in this kind of an issue. So far, germane.
Yeah. Okay. So very interesting. Right now, after hearing all of you, parang I can't make up my mind. Ano bang gagawin? Mandatory or not? But we'll pause here. When we return, our guests give their final reflections on tonight's issue. This is Abogado.
Welcome back. You are watching Abogado. We've heard compelling arguments on both sides of the question, lively and robust at that. Should mandatory drug testing cover all government employees and appointed officials? On the affirmative, we have attorney Nicole Feliciano, and on the negative, attorney Samantha Tan.
Now we turn to our guests for their final reflections. Attorney Nicole, we begin with you.
Public office is at all times a public trust. This constitutional principle is not an abstraction but a duty that binds every official and employee. Mandatory random drug testing gives a practical meaning to this standard by reminding public servants that accountability does not end at election or appointment, but continues throughout their tenure. This measure, again, is preventive rather than punitive. It is not designed to humiliate, to deter misconduct, but preserve confidence in the government and to ensure that those in authority remain fit in the discharge of their duties. Financial considerations are also well noted. It is worth mentioning that the Commissioner June of BIR and even Commissioner Naps of the Bureau of Customs has raised 4 trillion pesos in 2024 combined in their agencies. These costs, however, are outweighed by the benefits of ensuring integrity and fitness in the government. Mandatory testing creates what may be called the Big Brother theory, an atmosphere of constant possibility that promotes self-discipline among these public officials. As an infrastructure and lawyer myself, I appreciate the programs of the No Contact Apprehension Scheme of MMDA and the traffic enforcement and Commissioner June's RAF program, where BIR's task force is dedicated to combat tax evaders' tactics through an algorithm that empowers them to identify these receipts. It is not by punishing constantly, but shaping the behavior through the knowledge that accountability may be tested by any time for these public officials. As such, should this atmosphere of constant surveillance, as if someone is always watching, be imposed in a government agency through the Big Brother theory, I believe it would serve as an effective deterrent while at the same time respect the rights of privacy and the rights against self-incrimination of these public officials.
Thank you so much, Attorney Nicole. Attorney Samantha, you're closing.
I have the same submission that public office must be of public trust. However, we have always have to remember that they already passed the merit and fitness test. Before they would get admitted in a public office, they passed rigorous exams, mental and physical and medical exams. Definitely, if a person would pass all of those exams, he is already fit when he entered the public office. But to constantly bombard a person with a fear that he could be a user or potential user, that will make us ask a question. is public office now a precursor for drugs?
Interesting. Interesting that you ended on that note. Because the other thing that crossed my mind is every time we go through airports, di ba, parang may presumption na may dala kang bomb. Kasi kung makacheck sila, katakot-takot, i-x-ray na nga. Pag may liquid lang na konti, bubuksan pa. And then, I suppose, yung parang ganun yung feeling mo, may presumption, check ka talaga. So, for me, if policy-wise, we're trying to promote a drug-free country, is that still your stand na parang you're treating it as if your position is a precursor?
Let us come up with an understanding
as
of what is policy making in relation to legislation. Legislation is different from policy making. Policy making is the objective that the government wants to achieve. We want a drug-free country. Very good. But how do we achieve that? Would be, there must be a tool, which is, first, you ideate. What is it that makes a person use drugs? Is it really the ones in the public office because we are so concerned about it? Or is it the environment where he belongs, where we should be the one, we would be the one to, where we should focus our attention and spend more money, value efficient activities and inputs for us to come up with a change of society. Then comes legislation that will make it a compelling activity. So there has to be a study, not just, because I feel maraming addict sa gobyerno, we must have random mandatory drug testing. You know, rational thinking dictates, is it really the public office, is public office really ridden with drug users? Yun ang tanong.
But how do we know?
Addict ba silang
until
lahat?
it tests? How do we know? Malay mo, we haven't tested them. I'm just joking. I'm just joking.
Well, ginagawa naman na yun eh. We have mandatory random testing almost in even
But it
judiciary,
hasn't
even this
prevented
year.
still.
Yeah.
Nandyan pa
I do
din.
remember during the time of former President Duterte, a lot of government agencies internally passed their own department orders
Yes.
making
The initiative.
mandatory drug testing part of their policy. Yeah.
Pero, bakit bumalik? O kung meron man, bakit bumalik? What's the data is telling us?
So the leaders have to recognize the problem. If you don't recognize the problem, then these initiatives will not be at play.
Is there really, in the first place, is there really a problem? Like the question, what is the data? Because the Dangerous Drugs Board is saying that there is already a decline of use. So, what's the data telling us? Dapat pa ba natin pagtuunan ng pansin? Do we really have to focus so much in drug use in public office? Why don't we answer zero poverty, clean water, and sanitation, gender
We can always do
equality,
these
strong
things
institution?
simultaneously naman, Attorney Sam.
Pero strong institution, let's focus on the 17 SDGs more in achieving economic development and progress from a third world to a better GNI and GDP and GNP.
Well, global best practice. I mean, Singapore is drug-free. I mean, these just prove that.
But
they
it's not
have
just
money.
drug testing that they did.
Of
It's
course.
really they are strong in suppressing supply.
And simultaneous at that. I mean,
But it's really
helping
more
in the
on
infrastructure, building good policy.
cut the supply.
And then,
It's just like a fire. If you are going to put down a fire, cut off oxygen.
Hindi ba pagkakinat mo rin yung buyers, magkukonti yung supply kasi walang demand?
well, that one I agree with you too. I'm really honest.
No. Pero kahit pa mataas ang demand, kung walang supply, saan sila maghahanap?
Hindi naman natin, to be honest, we have to recognize the problem that it's harder to do that. The root cause of it is that meron talagang supplies na hindi natin alam kung saan talaga nanggagaling at saan natin talaga ibibigay,
Pero lower the
diba?
supply. Lower the supply, man would adapt.
Yeah.
Di
Well,
ba?
since I've asked my question at natahimik si Attorney Mike, ganyan talaga, sipag ka, surrounded ka by women na madadaldal. Yung mahirap sumingit. No? Baka you have a final question, partner. I'll give the floor to you.
Not really a final question, but I guess, in my view, the wisdom behind the mandatory drug testing for, in this case, elected government officials, siguro maganda naman yung gustong i-achieve. But ang problema, and I'm just sharing my view here, partner, right? As the host, we're also entitled to share our views. In my thinking, it's a violation of your constitutional right. You know, it adds another requirement which is not provided for in the
Supreme
Constitution.
Court has declared it unconstitutional. Pero yung tricky nga is parang gumawa tayong separate category. Pagka elected, you can't make it mandatory, but for mga appointed officials and career officials.
Actually, correct me if I'm wrong, but even partner, there is a COMELEC resolution in the past, which was declared unconstitutional because they provided for such mandatory testing for both appointed and elected officials.
Tapos they had a list pa nga na nag-comply or hindi. Ito yung kahit na nanalo ka na, you cannot take oath. But we can, by the way, going back to the argument about like Singapore, we cannot always copy the economic agenda of Singapore because Singapore is not a democratic and republican state.
But it's always about best practices. If they recognize the problem early on, then the government has to come up with a good leadership that recognizes that they can also have to lead by example.
Economic principle is always saying that if you copy a development progress of one country and apply it in another country, it will not work because of some ethical, racial, and cultural differences.
The nuances.
The nuances will always differ. So, what is the good practices in Singapore, in Malaysia, in Indonesia, in India?
I agree with you on that one.
Will not work in the Philippines. Will never work in the Philippines. And whatever works in the Philippines will never work in Indonesia, in India, in Singapore, nor in Malaysia.
But one thing
So
is,
we should come up with a more creative, more progressive, and a more human rights-related device and solution in capturing the users and bringing them to rehabilitation.
Siguro partner, one tanong kay Attorney Samantha. Kasi you gave some strong arguments, no? Pero let's look at the empirical data. Ano ba talagang empirical data dyan? Is it effective? Let's say the mandatory random testing, has it been proven effective? Kasi in line with what you were saying, kailangan natin tignan ang numbers. If there's a decline or whatever. Now, in this case, has it been effective in terms of ensuring that our elected officials or our appointed officials are quote-unquote drug-free?
The elected, wala tayong magagawa. Unconstitutional, never been done. With the drivers, we did. Before you get to renew your license, you need to go through the urine drug testing. But again, we have seen accidents, fatal accidents because drivers take drug simply. Meron pang ang PNP chief, di ba, nagsabi na, I don't want to quote him. I don't want to be an apologist for something that is wrong, no? So, it did not work. The drug testing for the drivers did not work. So, what will make drug testing, random mandatory drug testing work in public office? Ito, mandatory, all, renewal of driver's licenses. Hindi nag-work, meron pa rin nakakalusot. So, random na nga. It's Russian roulette. You're not even sure if you will be able to get that user or you pin him down.
Interesting. So, I think for me, hindi pa rin made up ang mind ko. Although I am leaning towards Attorney Nicole's position na it's a deterrent. It
has to be mandatory.
So, okay lang sa akin mandatory. Kasi kahit ikaw siguro kung if you give into recreational drugs, sometimes parang it stops you from taking that risk. Or otherwise, parang you're really jumping in and bahala na kahit mag-test sila, di ba? Kung mahuli or hindi. Pero if you're aware na may test, then you're like,
it's like
parang even if you have friends that might be bad influence around you, it will really stop you because you're thinking na kung may consequence pag nag-test.
Good point, partner. No? And maybe just to add, I guess the next question would be, how effective really are these tests? Di ba? Okay, we can talk about test.
Yes.
Pero gaano ba ka-effective? Ito bang ginagamit nating proseso? The protocols that has been adopted to test, are they world-class that mahuhuli ka talaga?
Gold
in the
standard.
same way that nahuhuli natin ang mga sportsmen na gumagamit ng illegal drugs, nahuhuli talagang to the
Drug
last
enhancers.
detail, enhancers. Now, my first question is, our own system of doing the test, are they really the gold standard na talagang mahuhuli natin sila? Or number two, it's not. And number three, there are ways now for people to actually evade because they also take something to counter. So I'm just saying that,
daw,
Yeah.
and coconut.
well, that's what they say.
Yan ang pang ano natin, ibang episode natin. Oo, ano na yan, subtopic
Topic.
number 3 to be continued. But thank you again, Attorney Nicole and Attorney Samantha, for lending your expertise with us tonight.
Yeah, tonight's discussion has indeed been very exciting and robust, partner, di ba? It reminded us that policies meant to protect society must always be tested against fairness, necessity, and constitutional safeguards. The law is never abstract. It lives in the balance between order and liberty.
That's why Abogado is here to dissect the issues, uphold reason, and bring light to debates that matter.
This is Abogado. Good night.